Edward II, 1327, the betrayed king. Edward II rose to the throne in 1307, son of the mighty Edward I, but he was never his father. Where his father ruled with iron, Edward ruled with instinct and affection, especially for one man, Piers Gaveston, a companion whose influence outraged the barons and deeply humiliated his wife, Queen Isabella of France. As famine and military failures mounted, the Scottish victory at Bannockburn left England humiliated, his authority crumbled, nobles rebelled, Gaveston was murdered, and distrust poisoned the royal court. By 1325, Isabella had crossed to France, aligned with her lover Roger Mortimer, and gathered an army against her own husband. In 1326, they invaded England. Edward was abandoned by nearly everyone, captured and imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. Official records say he later died of natural causes. No one believed it. Rumors spoke of a brutal execution, a red-hot poker used to conceal the evidence of murder, an image that turned palace intrigue into medieval horror. For England, it was unthinkable, a queen conspiring to kill a king, a dynasty devouring itself. His teenage son, Edward III, eventually overthrew Mortimer and forced his mother from power, ensuring vengeance and restoration of royal order. But the act left a scar no coronation could erase. Edward II became the first British monarch likely murdered on direct order of family, a warning etched into royal history. The trail within the crown cuts deeper than any blade.
Richard II, 1399, the Dethroned and Starved. Richard II came to the throne as a child of 10, grandson to the great Edward III. He entered a kingdom weary of war and heavy with expectation, but where his ancestors ruled through strength, Richard relied on ceremony, demanding obedience as if divinity itself protected him. He adored pageantry, punished dissent, and surrounded himself with favorites who fed his pride and drained his treasury. By his 20s, England was restless. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 had shown how fragile kingship could be, and Richard's arrogance only widened that crack. Among those he angered most was his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster. When Richard exiled Henry and seized his inheritance, loyalty finally snapped. While the king was away in Ireland, Henry returned with an army. Castles opened their gates without a fight. Richard fled. No throne, no allies, no rescue. He surrendered at Flint Castle, formally abdicated, and was taken north to Pontefract Castle, where the crown's youngest prodigy became its most pitiful prisoner. A year later, he was dead, either starved to death or quietly murdered. Henry crowned himself Henry IV, the first Lancastrian king. Yet Richard's ghost lingered. Many believed he survived, inspiring uprisings in his name. His violent removal set a pattern England would repeat for the next century. Kings unseated by cousins, vengeance breeding vengeance. From that prison cell grew the blood feud that would explode as the Wars of the Roses, the dynasty's reminder that a crown won by betrayal is never truly secure.
Henry VI, 1471, the saintly victim. Henry VI was never built for war or intrigue. Crowned at just 9 months old, he inherited the power of 2 kingdoms, England and France, and the impossible job of keeping both. But unlike the fiery rulers before him, Henry was gentle, bookish, deeply religious. He preferred prayer to politics, charity to combat. In a 15th century court driven by ambition, that kindness looked like weakness. As rivals circled, the realms split in two: the House of Lancaster, Henry's bloodline, and the House of York, led by Richard of York and later his son Edward. What began as a quarrel for legitimacy became decades of civil war, the Wars of the Roses. While nobles switched sides and families tore themselves apart, Henry drifted between catatonic silence and holy visions. Even his queen, Margaret of Anjou, fought more fiercely than he could. By 1470, fortune briefly returned. Henry restored to the throne as a puppet king. Months later, Edward IV swept back, crushing the Lancastrians at Tewkesbury. Their only heir, Prince Edward of Westminster, was killed on the field. That night, the quiet man of prayer was once again a prisoner in the Tower of London. On May 21st, 1471, Henry VI was found dead. Of melancholy, the report said. No one believed it. Most accepted the truth. He was murdered on Edward IV's command. His death ended the direct Lancastrian line and sealed Yorkist power. The last saintly king had been extinguished by ambition. In the silence of that tower cell, divine right gave way to brute survival, proving once more that in England's monarchy, virtue is no shield against blood.
The Princes in the Tower, 1483, is one of England's darkest riddles. 2 boys, 1 crown, and a silence that still chills royal history. In 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly, leaving his 12-year-old son, Edward V, heir to the throne. Too young to rule alone, the boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named protector to safeguard the succession. At first, the nation trusted him. Then came the whispers. Richard removed rivals, seized control of the government, and declared the late king's marriage invalid, making both princes illegitimate. Soon after his coronation as Richard III, the boys, Edward V and 9-year-old Richard of Shrewsbury, were locked in the Tower of London for their own protection. It was the last the world ever saw of them. Chroniclers claimed the boys were smothered in their sleep by order of their uncle. Others blamed loyalists, foreign agents, or Henry Tudor supporters eager to destroy Richard's reputation. No proof ever surfaced, only nightfall over the tower's bloody chamber. 2 small skeletons found there centuries later seemed to confirm the horror, but even now science can't be sure. Whatever the truth, the disappearance shattered England's faith in divine kingship. When Henry VII defeated Richard III 2 years later, he built his Tudor dynasty on both victory and vengeance. Yet the question never died. Did England's crown rest on child murder? The vanished princes became eternal symbols, innocence sacrificed to power, family consumed by ambition. Every new generation peers into those stone walls and asks the same question: where did the children go? And what price did the crown truly pay to forget them?
Anne Boleyn, 1536. When Henry VIII met Anne Boleyn, she was everything his court was not: clever, witty, ambitious, and unwilling to bow easily. Their passion wasn't just a love story, it became a revolution. To marry her, Henry shattered England's bond with Rome, dissolved centuries of papal power, and named himself head of the church. For a time, Anne was the most powerful woman in Europe, idolized, envied, hated. But she failed at the one duty that mattered most: delivering a son. She gave Henry a brilliant daughter, the future Elizabeth I. Yet miscarriages followed, and the king's adoration turned to impatience. His gaze shifted toward Jane Seymour. Within months, the queen who'd split Christendom was accused of adultery, incest, and conspiracy against the crown. The charges were thin but convenient. 5 men, including her own brother, were executed beside her scandal. Anne faced her trial in the Tower's Great Hall, calm, dignified, and certain of her doom. On May 19, 1536, dressed in gray and crimson, she knelt before a French swordsman, Henry's gesture of mercy, and with a single stroke, her head fell. The crowd gasped. The king remarried within days. Anne's death signaled that royal favor was deadlier than any enemy. She helped create the Church of England and paid for it with her life. Her daughter would later wear the crown her mother died for, proving that even in execution, Anne Boleyn changed the monarchy forever, a warning etched in steel that no queen's love outweighs a king's will.
Catherine Howard, 1542. She was barely 17 when she caught the aging Henry VIII's eye. Catherine Howard, cousin to Anne Boleyn, stepped into a court already soaked in fear. Henry was 50, obese, plagued by pain and suspicion, but when she smiled, he felt young again. He called her his rose without thorns. For a moment, it seemed love had softened the tyrant. But youth and inexperience were dangerous traits beside a king who had already executed 2 wives. Catherine came from a fallen noble family, raised more in flirtation than formality. When rumors surfaced about her past, old romances, hidden letters, a secret music teacher named Francis Durham, the court sharpened its knives. Then came a new accusation, that she'd taken a lover after marriage, the handsome courtier Thomas Culpeper. Whether desire or desperation led her to him, it sealed her fate. Henry's heartbreak turned instantly to rage.
An inquiry by Archbishop Cranmer uncovered enough confessions to satisfy royal paranoia. The men were tortured and executed. Catherine was dragged to the Tower, trembling but resigned. Witnesses said she practiced placing her head on the block the night before. On February 13, 1542, she was led to the scaffold at dawn and spoke only one line. "I die a queen, but I would have rather had been the wife of Culpeper." The axe fell, and the king wept, then married again. Catherine's death confirmed what England already feared. Henry VIII's court no longer sought justice, only survival. Even innocence wasn't protection. For a Tudor queen, love and death had become the same vow.
Mary I, Bloody Mary, Faith in Flames, 1555 to 1558. When Mary Tudor became England's first crowned queen in 1553, she ruled with a heart shaped by exile, fear, and faith. The daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she had watched her mother cast aside and her religion torn apart. So when the crown finally rested on her head, she vowed to restore what her father had destroyed, the old Catholic order. Her reign began with promise, the marriage to Philip of Spain, a royal alliance meant to bind England back to Rome, but the people soon saw something else, a queen guided as much by faith as by vengeance. Between 1555 and 1558, nearly 280 Protestants were burned at the stake, including Bishops Ridley and Latimer, whose final cry, "We shall this day light such a candle in England as I trust shall never be put out," became prophecy. The flames that rose from Smithfield were meant to purify her kingdom. Instead, they scorched her reputation forever. Each execution deepened her isolation. Philip fled back to Spain, her imagined heirs never came, and England's crops withered under famine and plague. When Mary died at just 42, she left no child, no peace, only ashes and a new identity for her nation. Her half-sister Elizabeth I rose to power promising tolerance, but building the very Protestant England Mary had tried to erase. For every burnished coin bearing her face, history branded her another name, Bloody Mary. Her faith was absolute, her mission divine, yet her legacy proved how belief, without mercy, can set even a throne on fire.
Mary Queen of Scots. Mary Stuart's story reads like the perfect royal tragedy. Born to rule, married to danger, and executed by her own blood. Crowned Queen of Scotland when she was 6 days old, she grew into a monarch of rare beauty and strong Catholic faith in a country already leaning toward Protestant reform. Her marriages, first romantic, then disastrous, pulled her life into scandal. When her second husband, Lord Darnley, was murdered and suspicion fell on her lover Bothwell, Scotland turned against her. She fled across the border to England, seeking protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Instead of sanctuary, Mary found a prison. For 19 years, she was moved from castle to castle, a royal guest turned captive, always watched, always feared. To Elizabeth, she wasn't just family, she was a rival claimant, a living symbol for every Catholic who wanted England's throne restored to Rome. Plots kept surfacing in Mary's name, some real, many imagined. The final one, the Babington plot of 1586, gave Elizabeth's council the excuse they'd waited for, Mary accused of conspiring to murder the English queen. Despite hesitation, Elizabeth signed the warrant. On February 8, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle, Mary, Queen of Scots, walked calmly to the block in crimson, color of martyrdom. One swing, then another, and the rivalry was over. Yet her death solved little. Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, later inherited both thrones as James I of England, uniting the crowns his mother and cousin had died over. Mary's blood ended a feud, but her grace in death reshaped history, the queen destroyed by politics, whose lineage ultimately ruled them all.
Charles I, 1649, the beheaded monarch. Charles I believed kings ruled by divine right, answerable only to God, never Parliament. It was a belief that would cost him both his throne and his head. He inherited a kingdom already split by religion and class, yet demanded obedience with little compromise. He raised taxes without consent, dismissed Parliament when challenged, and surrounded himself with symbols of absolute power. To his subjects, it felt less like kingship and more like tyranny. By 1642, England erupted into civil war. Royalists for the crown, parliamentarians for the people. For 7 years, the country tore itself apart. Towns ravaged, families divided, 200,000 dead from battle and disease. At first, the king's armies held ground, but Oliver Cromwell's new model army broke them. Charles surrendered, escaped, then plotted again, forcing a second conflict. This time, there would be no mercy. Parliament did what Europe had never seen. It put a reigning king on public trial. Charged with treason against his own nation, Charles refused to plead, declaring a king cannot be tried by his subjects. But the verdict was already sealed. On January 30th, 1649, outside the banqueting house at Whitehall, the axe fell in one clean swing. A groan rose from the crowd. The monarchy itself was abolished. England became a republic under Cromwell's rule. Briefly, uneasily, until Charles's son reclaimed the crown in 1660. For the first time, royal blood had been spilled by justice, not rebellion. Charles I's execution set a precedent that power could answer to the people. And though the monarchy returned, it never ruled untouched again, the crown forever haunted by the echo of that single stroke.
Glencoe Massacre, 1692. In the frozen winter of 1692, a Highland valley became the scene of one of Scotland's most haunting betrayals. After the Jacobite Rising, King William III ordered every clan chief to swear loyalty to him or be declared traitor. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were late by only a few days. They took the oath, but bureaucracy and prejudice worked faster than mercy. In London, orders were signed, punish this clan, root out that nest of rebels. Soldiers from the Campbell Regiment, traditional rivals of the MacDonalds, arrived in Glencoe weeks later, posing as friendly guests. For nearly 2 weeks, the clansmen offered them food, shelter, and fires against the snow. Then, before dawn on February 13th, their guests turned executioners. 38 men, women, and children were slaughtered in their own homes. Many more froze trying to flee through the mountains. The massacre broke every Highland law of honor. Even in war, to kill under hospitality was unforgivable. When news spread, outrage swept Scotland. Blame pointed to Sir John Dalrymple in Edinburgh and the king himself. Both denied intent, but few believed them. Parliament investigated, condemned the act, yet no one was punished. Glencoe became a wound that never healed. To Highlanders, it symbolized royal deceit. The moment trust itself was murdered. For England's crown, it was another stain hidden under parchment and politics. Centuries later, every visitor who walks that quiet glen feels the same icy stillness, the echo of gunfire swallowed by snow, and the whisper that once again, royal power demanded blood for loyalty offered too late.
Jacobite Rebellions and Culloden, 1746. It was rebellion built on memory, the dream of a lost dynasty. For half a century after the Stuarts were driven from power, their followers, the Jacobites, believed one day a true king would return. That hope took flesh in 1745 when Charles Edward Stuart, the charismatic Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed in Scotland to reclaim his grandfather's crown from George II of Hanover. At first it worked, clans rallied, ancient banners flew again, and in one breathtaking march the Jacobites seized Edinburgh and pushed deep into England. But courage met logistics, supply lines thinned, allies never came. Outnumbered and exhausted, the rebels retreated north, the dream unraveling with every mile. On April 16, 1746, near Inverness, the last battle on British soil was fought at Culloden Moor. Facing the royal army of the Duke of Cumberland, the Highlanders charged through bog and cannon fire. In barely 40 minutes, royal artillery and disciplined musket lines turned the moor into a killing field, about 1,500 Jacobites dead, the Stuart cause erased. Charles escaped into the heather, later across the sea, leaving a legend far larger than his victory. The aftermath was merciless. Cumberland's men hunted survivors, burned crofts, banned bagpipes, tartans, even the Gaelic tongue. The Highlands were pacified by fear, their clan system shattered to prevent revolt ever again.
Culloden ended 200 years of Stuart ambition and bound Scotland tighter to the Hanoverian crown, but at a human cost that still echoes through its songs. In that windswept moor, the monarchy didn't just crush rebellion, it silenced a culture that had dared to challenge it.
The Gordon Riots, 1780. In the summer of 1780, London became a city under siege, not from invasion, but from its own people. England called itself Protestant to the bone, yet centuries of fear toward Catholics still burned quietly beneath the surface. When Parliament passed the Papist Act of 1778, easing restrictions on Catholics who swore loyalty to the crown, one man fanned those embers into wildfire: Lord George Gordon. Gordon, fiery and unpredictable, warned that George III's government was betraying the faith. He rallied nearly 50,000 supporters, men, women, and apprentices, to march on Parliament demanding the law's repeal. It began peacefully, petition in hand. It ended in 5 nights of pure chaos. Buildings burned, prisons burst open, soldiers fired on the crowds. By the time smoke cleared, nearly 300 people were dead, and half of London lay blackened by flame. The rioters shouted, "No popery!" But what they truly exposed was panic, the fear that religion could unseat reason and that mobs could unseat kings. George III watched from behind palace walls as the capital disintegrated. For hours, his rule hung by a thread. Troops had to reclaim the city street by street, bayonet by bayonet. When order returned, Gordon was arrested for treason, but later acquitted, the same courts terrified of making him a martyr. The riots forced Britain's leaders to confront an uncomfortable truth. Loyalty built on fear was as unstable as the flames that consumed their capital. Faith had become fury, and even the world's most secure monarchy learned how quickly devotion can turn against the throne that claims to defend it.
Peterloo Massacre, 1819. By 1819, Britain's empire was swelling, yet ordinary people starved at home. Factories filled, wages shrank, and voting rights belonged to a tiny noble class. Under George IV, hunger and debt gnawed at the new industrial cities, Manchester most of all. Out of frustration grew hope. Tens of thousands of workers, women and children among them, marched peacefully for parliamentary reform. Their banners read "Liberty and Bread." On August 16th, they gathered at St. Peter's Field to hear Henry Hunt, a popular radical speaker. More than 60,000 stood shoulder to shoulder under rare northern sun, singing, cheering, demanding the vote. Local magistrates panicked. Fearing revolution, they called in the yeomanry cavalry, volunteer horsemen armed with sabers, many already drunk. Without warning, they charged straight into the unarmed crowd. In 10 chaotic minutes, the celebration became slaughter. 11 people were killed, over 600 injured. Women and children were cut down as they fled. The government congratulated itself for restoring order, while newspapers named the tragedy after a recent British victory, Peterloo, a bitter echo of Waterloo. Instead of ending protest, it ignited a movement. Public outrage spread across the country. Pamphlets, poems, and rallies demanded rights and accountability. Authorities responded with censorship and crackdowns, yet the idea of reform no longer could be silenced. The Peterloo Massacre became a turning point between monarchy and the masses, exposing the price of denying representation. From that field of blood eventually grew the Reform Acts, trade unions, and modern democracy itself, a painfully slow redemption carved from the wounds of ordinary people who dared to speak before their king would listen.
Irish rebellions and colonial crackdowns, 1798 to 1919. Across the Irish Sea, rebellion was never just a moment, it was a rhythm. For more than a century, Ireland rose again and again against British rule, and each time the Crown answered with the same language: force. It began in 1798, when the United Irishmen, inspired by the revolutions of America and France, demanded independence and equality for Catholics and Protestants alike.
The uprising was crushed in rivers of blood. Tens of thousands were killed, and the survivors driven underground. The Act of Union followed in 1801, binding Ireland formally to Britain, but no act can legislate loyalty. Throughout the 19th century, famine, eviction, and empire rule deepened the divide. By the early 1900s, new voices rose, the Irish Volunteers and Sinn Féin, ready to turn words into war. On Easter Monday, 1916, rebels seized Dublin's General Post Office and declared a republic. For 6 days, the city burned under artillery fire. When the rising collapsed, 16 leaders, including Patrick Pearse and James Connolly, were taken to Kilmainham jail and shot one by one in the yard. The executions shocked Ireland and the world. Instead of killing the dream, Britain had martyred it. Support for independence exploded. Within 5 years, the Irish War of Independence forced negotiation and divided the island into Northern Ireland and the Free State. What began as a colonial crackdown ended as the undoing of an empire's moral image. The story of Ireland's rebellions is the story of empire learning too late that fear cannot rule forever. Every volley fired in Dublin echoed through Westminster, a reminder that every crown bought with violence loses a measure of its shine.
Diana, Princess of Wales, 1997. By the 1990s, the British monarchy looked untouchable, until Diana Spencer, the shy nursery teacher who married a prince, showed the world its cracks. Her wedding to Charles in 1981 was a fairy tale. Her marriage, anything but. Loneliness, infidelity, mental health battles, and relentless tabloid pursuit turned her life into global theater. When the couple divorced in 1996, Diana lost the title Her Royal Highness, but gained something the palace didn't expect: undivided public love. She reinvented herself as the People's Princess, championing AIDS awareness, mental health, and landmine victims. Her warmth crossed borders, threatening to outshine the crown itself. Then, on August 31st, 1997, in a tunnel in Paris, her car crashed while fleeing paparazzi. Diana died at 36. The world froze, grief collapsing into disbelief, disbelief into rage. British mourning turned to accusation. Where was the Queen? Why the silence? Bouquets filled the gates of Buckingham Palace while headlines called for compassion. For the first time in modern history, the monarchy seemed emotionally tone-deaf, the symbol of duty confronted by the demand for humanity. Under pressure, Elizabeth II finally addressed the nation live, speaking not as a sovereign, but as a grandmother. It steadied the crown, but its image was forever changed. Diana's death became the monarchy's mirror, reflecting its distance, its traditions, its need to evolve. She didn't just die a princess, she became a turning point, forcing the House of Windsor to choose between secrecy and sincerity. The throne survived, but only by learning the language of feeling, one written first in the flowers left and the tears shed for Diana, the people's crown.